So, Project 427. And why 427? It's hitchhiked off 42 from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And 427 is in my phone number. And so I've been noticing 427 a lot on license plates. And noticing this number helps me with information overload out in society, because to notice a number, just like the same number, is less information than looking at all the street signs when driving, and those are words which have more meaning in them than numbers. And so it sort of helps to limit the information coming into the brain, and then making very small subset of information salient. This might have helped me on my journey back from my road trip, had I done that. But I was noticing words like Jesus and just other words that have more meaning and association in the brain. So 427, I don't know exactly how I want to create it. It's sort of open, and if you decide to create a 427 game or any other 3-number game, you can make it however you want. But part of the point of it was to notice 427 out in society, to sort of limit the salience network, to make less meaning, and this might prevent associations that might cause anxiety or move us up into mania or something like that. And the other thing about it is, I think there's something about getting the hands moving with the eyes and the heart at the same time. And the whole body, of course, like the feet moving and walking. And that eventually leads to wandering with love and the magical backpack, which is part of what I've started to create on the Synchronicity store. But this game could extend to others too. But part of it is just noticing 427, whether it's 4:27 p.m. or 427 on a license plate or a house number. And one of the things is, if we're able at that moment to sort of go into silence and use the hands moving with the eyes and the heart at the same time. And I feel that if we can go into that movement, if multiple people notice 4:27 p.m. and they go into that movement, it sort of creates a momentum of that movement of the eyes and the heart and the hands moving as one, as opposed to, for example, the brain kind of going and then the body moving on autopilot. So it's only a small bit of the day noticing 4:27, or not, it doesn't really matter. And the thing of it too is, the body, like, we're using our hands mostly like this on our phones and stuff, and it's just sort of like making our hand portion of our brain smaller, and then it makes the hands less expressive. So, something to do at 4:27 if you're not driving is to sort of say something and move the hands in an expressive way, or do these sorts of things. It's sort of to get into the hands and sort of reprogram the hands. Because the thing is with the hands is, if we want to say with bipolar, there's sometimes wanting to end one's life. Well, the hands need to be involved in that in some way, usually. not for all methods, but for a lot of them, or like harming others or something. So, you know, I wanted also as a part of this to create a few kits to help other people like me, and like we could all create a kit. And I was thinking of sending it out through the mail, but it gets a bit expensive. So, you know, even if we have one on hand and we come across another person who has these types of experiences or challenges, we can give a kit, and you know, you can make it up. And I had a little notebook as one, and then, you know, a set of earplugs that people can keep with them, because sometimes there's just sort of like sensory overload, like things are too loud. So this can be a gesture of like turning the volume down. And you know, there can be fun things like here, here is a feather, collected some feathers. So it's like, this is a gesture of, you know, if somebody's trying to clip your wings, here's a feather, because we do tend to sort of unintentionally tear each other down, and so that could be for that, you know. And we could also include like a piece of like hemp string. Now you could use it string to harm yourself or someone, you know, or you can use it to create something. And so just adding some bits that are just kind of random, like a piece of gold paper. Like gold is really nice to look at, so it's like sensory modulation. And part of this is, you know, touching like physical things that are part of our environment, and not only reaching for the phones, which the phones are very helpful, useful, creative devices, but we need to also be able to create. So somebody could even create something with these 3 bits, right? So part of so-called bipolar is there's this time of increased creativity, and then as that energy seems to fall out, there's a time of increased you know, conflict and depression, and maybe so-called psychosis or something. So I think it's possible by spending some time each day, or whenever we notice 427 or a significant number for you, is to you know, just sort of like play with these things for no reason. Because the other part of this project is that there's this movement of like meaning, and like the way society is designed for us to always be like go, 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 and moving according to the meanings that we've been programmed with. So if 427 every day, a certain amount of people tune into like looking at these things and sort of like just sort of put them in front of you, and then start picking them up. The first day you just pick them up, like maybe you have your kit with you and you're at a coffee shop and you just start kind of picking them up, and then the next day you start like, you know, putting them together, or like putting them in your ears or something. You start to train the body a little bit with like gestures of, hey, like this is too loud, I have something here that can help me with that. And it's really small and portable and easy to carry around. And you know, there could be a couple sticky notes in there, so then people could leave like a positive message on the mirror in a bathroom or something. And you know, in this way we're starting to add perceptive elements to actuality in the same way that we really like to add these elements to the internet. If we can start to play this sort of game in actuality, it will make possibly our brains more attuned to all that which is around us. And I really don't know. And then, you know, I was a bit up and I ordered a bunch of stuff to possibly include in the kits, and like this orange bag is like for people, the kit would include one because cutting out blue light from like phones and screens is a way to allow the brain to make melatonin from serotonin. So we could actually make our own makeshift glasses out of these, you know, just with a string, that's not a string and a piece of this bag. So like instead of spending $10 or $15 on Amazon on the orange safety glasses like this, which also take up more space, you know, we can give out a kit to someone and they can make their own for free, or like help them make their own and try it for a very minimal cost. And then I created the starting of like a Synchronicity store, which is about making the actual space that we interact with safer to explore for people. Well, it could be for anyone. You know, maybe anyone could benefit from earplugs sometimes. And also people that are so-called bipolar, you know, starting to, like if we buy our glasses, then it costs more. If we make them, then we've just sort of used our hands in a creative way to make a gesture or a physical object that applies to a gesture that we can make to sort of tone down certain inputs. So instead of like yelling or getting angry to create space with words, we can start to get into a space where we've almost created a gesture for the different happenings that happen around us. And we can keep them in a backpack and carry it around with us. And the backpack would have these gestures of like sensory modulation. They would also have gestures of like friendship, gestures of altruism. You know, sometimes I like to play a game where I throw quarters on the ground so somebody will find it and feel lucky. But it's actually a little better to put the quarter like up here. So then if somebody finds it, it means that, you know, somehow their peripheral vision picked it up and perceived it and brought it into their visual space, which is part of how this, when the body gets to move in a space of perception and action, it's aware of the whole visual field of what's around it and starts to move based on what's around and less based on the internal thinking motives that might have nothing to do with what's actually around in space. So I could be thinking about something like, I want pizza, but I'm at work and I can't go get pizza. But if we're really attuned to perception action, you know, we'll want pizza when we see the pizza driving by and we'll stop and eat it. And, you know, I also got this like a little paper clip. And the point of this is for it to really mostly be pointless. Like most of it be pointless and some of it have a point in terms of toning down too much information or something, you know, or a feather, like as a visual reminder. of something. And, you know, we do this in our space, but part of this is to, part of this is so we have it on hand. And then I got this to make bracelets, which I wear. And the point of having like one of each color was if somebody says, hey, I like that, then I give it to them as a gesture of friendship, or I could give it to them as a gesture of friendship. And it's to bring more of what we seem to really like in technology into physical space. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who are doing this sort of thing, but, and then, so I have this like little heart hole punch, so you can put a little, there's one on the ground, you can put a little heart in there. And part of this too, put in a chocolate. And this is just a, like, it makes sound. Like these kits, they're not appropriate for children under a certain age, obviously. Like this, what I'm creating is for adults with kind of so-called bipolar, if you want to call it that. And there's more gold paper from chocolate. And so it's just, I got more hair ties. So you put in sort of like 2 of the same. So then that way a person can keep one and give one out. These might be a little big for the wrist. No, they're not bad, because they're kind of fun to wear on the wrist. And then, you know, these little glass eye things. And all this is kind of like meaningless, but that's part of the point, because with so-called bipolar, we get really into the meaning of everything, and everything feels so significant. And also words, and some of the words, they get turned into explaining. So then another thing would be to include one of these bags, because sometimes we get into this space where we feel really like helpful and altruistic, and we want to pick up garbage. So this is a way to, you know, keep that there, and you can like pick up some garbage sometimes, because we like to. And there's another type of string here. And I just have this box full of stuff, and then I got these baggies. Like I ordered all this stuff to like put this stuff in, but also part of the point of that was to, you know, if we buy like a nice product of some kind, put a little bit of it when it's clean in like a sample bag and give it to a friend who also like partly in these kits, and share it as like if it's a healthy product. So the point of that is for us to start getting into being interested in health. So the energy, it uplifts us and makes us feel like we can like utilize and spend it on anything. And sometimes we spend it on something that is kind of wasteful. But if in advance we can, you know, we can create some little kits or something, so that when we're feeling really altruistic, we can like give them away. And you know, if we have these, and it's like, okay, when I feel really kind of higher and I'm like wandering around outside, I'll give people bracelets, and not so many words, and like not all of our stuff or anything. And then I thought, okay, we'll give them a Werther candy because you're worth it. Werthers. And yeah, I was in California and I was doing all this, and then it was starting to become more difficult to do things, and I had ideas about fun ways to share this synchronicity thing, which were kind of manic. So yeah, I just felt like we could talk with people, and because we naturally do, and if we find out they have this bipolar thing, we could give them a kit and then invite them to play this game of 427, because part of it is about getting into this space of sort of wordless meaninglessness, like just sort of playing, you know. And I think it's possible that humans have already created this game. You know, we see this in children with the label of autism. You know, they start just sort of lining things up, or, you know, I'm not an expert, but, you know, they're sort of doing stuff that seems meaningless, and they're not really being as programmed into the meanings that we have. And I don't think it's, well, I'm not the only one to say that the way humanity's going, it can't continue indefinitely in terms of how we use resources and whatever. So it seems by what they're doing, it's like, okay, I'm not going to play that game because we can't continue to play that game. But they're doing that, you know, at a young age. And then we get really frustrated with them. But I feel like they need more space. And so, you know, this sort of acknowledges our need to go into some kind of meaningless space. And I don't know about the 427 thing, but yeah, I have more kits down here. And the other thing that I created to go with it was, you know, you can add like a piece of tape or whatever. Was this, and it's like a hexagon, but it's also a gesture of safety. Like if I went into so-called psychosis and I felt like I was so scared I was going to run off a cliff, I could like put my body, attach it to like a tree or something. And I had that experience where I did that one time. I attached my body, and what happened was I went into like a holotropic breathing state, and then I did end up in the psych ward, but at least I didn't sort of run off a balcony. So yeah, that's the thing. So this is just an idea to create a little bit of a friendship kit, because sometimes in bipolar we go out and, you know, when we do all these things of like giving away our stuff, and we're feeling really abundant, and we're feeling like we're friends with everyone, and we want everyone to have this abundance, and we have these sort of gestures of that. But I feel like we can sort of create our safety gestures in advance, and we can create our altruistic gestures. We can start creating gestures of health. You know, like if I have a favorite chapstick, I can use something to like scrape some off and put it in a bag, and then, you know, give it to a friend to try. You know, like when I'm thinking of this now, like a lot of times growing up, kids have this peer pressure, like, hey, like try this drug in this baggie. But imagine if we get this health product and we really like it, and we're like, hey, try this chapstick. It's really great. And I think it could be really great if we, as people who are labeled bipolar, get into more health. Because a lot of times they say, well, the energy of mania comes and it gets really hedonistic. And if we sort of plan to, buy some healthy gestures or take care of ourselves, or like when that urge to spend money comes, we have a plan of like, hey, I'm going to treat myself to a massage or acupuncture, or spend some time making these kits. So if I'm sort of low, I can spend time making some kits for myself, or just sort of like playing around with stuff. As a way to get our hands, like the point really is to get our eyes, hands, and heart and body moving together. And if we do that at 427 every day, or whenever we notice, we create our 427 kit. So there can be a kit of friendship, but there can also be, creating a 427 area in your room if you're stuck at home. And then every day at 427, I was thinking just for 5 minutes until 432, which is the frequency of love, 432 hertz. And so 5 minutes altogether, just like not thinking, just looking at stuff, wondering. And the thing with that too is that I feel like if we get some of the creative energy moving in this sort of meaningless whatever, our consciousness and our brains aren't separate. So if we have some of the same items and we're looking at them, it could lead to us seeing a way to innovate something that is in actuality. And then it's possible we could even make something to communicate at 432 where we share with the Synchronicity hashtag, like, hey, this is what I saw, or made, or just take a picture of it. And it's really about meaninglessness, because the mind already has these preformed meanings, and we're kind of like probing with those and making those things salient. So when we sit down and we do something really meaningless, just for the sake of sort of moving our hands, eyes, and heart, like almost everything we do, we say like, sometimes we don't know the meaning of why somebody does something. We see somebody do something and we say, oh, this means they don't like me, or this means this or that. So this time of 5 minutes or however long gets out of that space of thinking in terms of psychological cause and effect, and sort of like reward and punishment and blame and right and wrong and good and bad. So that's sort of the Newtonian way that the world is designed, is good, bad, right, wrong. And we're given these measurements, and our mind is kind of constantly going based on that. And a lot of teachings are like, be in the now, be present, and that's important. But what I'm saying here is that by sort of using our hands like this and whatever, just rearranging these things, we don't even have to really make anything out of it. Just sort of, oh, look, there's a circle and a square. And funny enough, I was reading the Time magazine creativity feature recently, and it said it said, what's his name? Leonardo da Vinci once had like all these examples of how to square a circle in the beginning of his notebook, like 800 times or something. So what is the point of that? He was writing it out, but here it is with so-called bipolar. We do a lot of writing, and I read in that magazine that writers are 10 times more likely to have the most severe form of bipolar. And like, what are we doing all this writing for? And I think it's good, but I think that we like to write because sometimes we're like channeling, and we like to watch our hand move, like our eyes moving, our hand writing in a notebook a lot of times, and the heart sort of channeling something. And it feels so meaningful and significant. We want to share. And I feel that it's possible, like it's hard to share it sometimes, or we share it and it just looks kind of nuts. Like this looks just as nuts, right? Like what's the big deal? But it's like a meaningless way to move the eyes, hands, and heart. In that the meaning is just for the sake of itself. And a lot of times with bipolar, we write a lot. I have like a whole box of notebooks that I'm never going to be able to get to all that. And I think that there's all this meaning in there, and I could probably write many books based on what I've written. And the thing is, I have a full shelf of books right in front of me, and I was sort of looking through a few of them, and man, like all that's written, it's kind of like already been written, and you can explore these books, and a lot of the stuff that I unfolded in my own mind for myself is already in this book. So like, what are more words gonna do? And I think in my exploration of possibilities with myself, I'm sort of seeing, and the world is seeing, that, you know, kids are sort of, their brains, some of them are naturally revolting to language as being sort of programmed as the mover of their bodies, and, you know, to the point where some are in a lot of pain and screaming or what have you. I'm not an expert or a judge on any of this, but I feel like, you know, a lot of times we see them doing these meaningless repetitions of things. And I think that if we as adults, like as bipolar, we could possibly help the children with autism by going into their movement, which we see as inane and meaningless. And I don't know enough about it. I do know, like, the first time I went into the creative state, I went to Value Village and bought all these bits and bobs, and I was like rearranging them, and I felt quite inventive. And it felt similar to how someone might, you know, how the person who invented Velcro may have come across it. And, you know, just to be able to do this, it is a gesture of, like, the miracle of the human hand, and how, you know, right now I can do this, and right now somewhere in the world, many surgeons are using their hands and tools and hand-eye coordination to fix someone's brain so they can continue to live. You know, and they're fixing someone's brain with their movement. And then this is just sort of acknowledging that same movement of the dexterity of the hands, which takes up, like, so much of the brain. And it's being really reduced with the phone use. And I don't think there's anything wrong with the phones. I like my phone. And I just feel like there could be something to creating this sort of meaningless movement and learning about gestures that can help. And I've tried a lot of things, And I feel like the gesture of taking certain vitamins from Dr. Peter Smith, his program, he's done a lot of research, like over 10 years, and he's a naturopath, which is great because now I don't have to do that. Like, he's the naturopath for me to consult with. And it's balancingbrainchemistry.co.uk. And I really need like the beauty of nature and walking in nature. So I'm just trying to see like this connection of the hands and like fine hand movement and just sort of playing with stuff. And there are other things that I have for that too, which are just stuff already, but I think just sort of like recombining stuff for the sake of it, you know, like no meaning. Oh, look, that fits there. And you could invent earplugs that have like a fancy little eye on the end, and then it looks kind of cool, right? Like you have eyes in your ears. So like I just invented something. And now I could spend the rest of my life going with this invention. Or, you know, I could share, hey, like by doing 427 today, this is what I discovered. And 427, it's also like, you know, there's 420, which is, you know, take some kind of marijuana and like go into one's inner consciousness and maybe lay there. I don't really know because I don't do that because I have psychosis to do that for me when it happens. And then this is like, okay, do that if you want. But 7 minutes later, like grab your stuff and start playing around. Like if we want to use that as like a pain relief, and there's so much suffering and pain in the world, like how can we not? Sometimes like we either take pharmaceuticals or we take street stuff, like whatever. But by doing this, you know, we're bringing that inner space of the gesture of trying to remove the suffering into also the outer space of trying to just like play around. Like, and this also I feel, if, you know, we kind of were raised and conditioned how most people are, it sort of puts the brain back in the state prior to conditioning where, you know, if you're a child, you start like reaching for stuff and seeing how it fits together and like developing your hand-eye coordination. So then when we start to do this too, it's creative. And, you know, part of creativity and bringing that online is really to quiet the mind. And, you know, a lot of times if we really create something creative, we're like, I don't even know how I did that. So this puts the brain in that sort of state. You know, we can kind of go back to the pre-child or pre-programmed state. Pre-programmed state before we sort of weren't doing these things. So it's really about like, it's really about nothing. It's really about, you know, this. And then as we do this, we can actually, I would think, oh, look, I can do the same thing, but with the string. And we don't have to make stuff, but if we do make stuff, you know, we can take a picture and deassemble it and do different things again. And, you know, of course there's like creativity kits and stuff like this, but sometimes we collect a lot of stuff. So this could be a creative way to give away some of our stuff, making some kits for friends, to kind of like play with and tell them about 427. And, you know, it's like oh, we're done work for the day. Now let's just like really do something meaningless, and you know, it's not necessarily entertaining. And I think it's just to reactivate that area of the brain that is curious to explore with hands. And you know, if we're at home with our own things, we don't have to worry about like, are we allowed to touch this or not? And I think it could help us as people with so-called bipolar start to find a new role for ourselves, to maybe like bring creativity into the world more, using our hands, eyes, and heart without talking, without so many words. Because the words, like in my experience, the first 3.5 years, I wasn't like interested in researching bipolar or any like words or proving anything about it. And I was pretty much fine. And then after I was more interested in like researching it and learning about it, and then I started to have more like relapses. So this isn't to like cure anything. This is just to acknowledge that we have these really dexterous hands, and we can start thinking about like, yeah, like what can we share when we're in that higher energy, when we're wanting to share. You know, we could share like, hey, I'm trying to share this sort of like creativity of like hands, eyes, and hearts, like heart moving together. And that would be a way for us to share with people, because sometimes we're just like randomly talking, and that gets our brain excited, and we feel like people understand, but maybe they don't. And I had that experience recently. But if we can sort of together create a way to share creativity, which is one of the things that is proven to be linked to so-called bipolar, you know, share the creativity and less of kind of like things, you know, getting the hands, because otherwise it's us out there moving with a lot of these words that we'd either say out loud or write down. And there's so many of them, they just get lost in translation and, you know, never put anywhere or published. And then we feel sort of like useless in a way. So, yeah, so this has to be taken with a grain of salt, because, you know, it's better to like collect bits and bobs that are free or inexpensive. And, you know, it's also a way for people with so-called bipolar to participate in the economy, augmenting like the health industry. If we're going to spend our money, spend it on healthy stuff, and then we feel a lot better. Not that we have to be healthy all the time or anything, but just sharing these gestures of health and sort of having something as a reminder. So there are other programs out there like RAP, that is like Wellness Recovery Action Plan. You try to like brainstorm everything you can do for yourself to keep yourself well. So you can create like a visual version of the gestures as reminders. So like could create like a table with certain items that are related to what it is that you need to do. Because what this does is it allows the body to get into a state of visually seeing the thing and acting on it, instead of relying on a movement of the mind to then go and pick something out. It's like a movement of what is around us. So we learn sort of perception action, which is, we need to, I feel, learn how to do perception action with our whole body and not only words. because I think the words are really making us not as well in a way. Like, there's so many words out there and words about words. It's so heady. Just getting back in the body, like, this is sort of like going back to a childlike state. And in a gesture, like sitting down and just sort of kind of playing with stuff randomly for no reason, just because it's there. And we could find out which things are more helpful, like, oh, and then this is kind of like this, and then seeing how this could create an idea for this, and then, well, then what else could this or this create an idea for? And I think, too, we can also start to create a role for ourselves whereby like being creative with this stuff, we can invent stuff and maybe participate together to invent things to share with others who might want to create them, who might have the capacities to do so. And so doing this, we might see that if we're not so much into like explaining, but like creating, you know, we can use words sometimes, like create a song. Yeah, I don't know, there's more to it than that. But, you know, gestures of safety, eventually creating a magical backpack. And I made a video of that. And basically, it's about having a bunch of different things in the backpack. So then if you're out and about, there's a high chance that you have something that somebody needs in the moment. And then it feels good to be able to be helpful in context instead of like sharing words that are kind of out of context. So like if I feel like we can translate less of the words and trying to explain, which in Mania is like explaining how beautiful and wonderful life is, and look at that bird and this and that, which is great. But when we do that movement too much, then the opposite movement of that is starting to explain symptoms, because we've sort of talked ourselves up and out of the regular, movement of how society works. And yeah, I don't know if this will do anything, but, you know, people do this thing where around the world they'll sit and meditate at the same time, like sit quietly and try to be quiet and open. So if we do this thing at the same time, where we're moving our hands and our eyes and our heart at the same time, it could be powerful. And the thing is, a lot of us are stuck in basements, or, you know, this is something that we can just do at home. And again, it's really supposed to be entirely meaningless. And if we're all as a certain like tribe of the human population, more of us doing this at the same time, it could create sort of this openness to, you know, this perception action. Because when we're manic and we're out in reality, we're like, ooh, this, like, everything seems like a good idea, and we go with it, and we keep going with it until basically we're on a path that we didn't even know how we got there. So, you know, this could open up some of that space, but just at home. And I don't know what it'll do, but I just think it could be something. Like, I just want to glue this here and then sell eyeball earplugs for $10. I don't know. Maybe I just discovered what I need to do for the rest of my life, just in this bit here. And the thing with bipolar is we get so many ideas that if we do this, some of the ideas we've thought of in the past, like millions of them, might come to some kind of like little prototype, and then that is more shareable than just like words. We can start sharing pictures of that. And yeah, like there's so much stuff that people do that I'm just gonna do it for the sake of whatever. And this is sort of the same thing. And this gets us out of this like trying to justify ourselves or like plead not to be stigmatized or whatever, just sort of going into this other space, and also acknowledging we don't really know what things mean. We can sometimes think we do. Maybe doing nothing and just sort of sitting here like this changes the world. Like this is sort of how we started, like crouched down over some rocks and like going like, oh, like here's a tool, and then it passed around. So I think by doing this, we could possibly change the world or bring some kind of manifestation to some of our ideas that we've already machinated a million times. And then, you know, we can share with other people. And, you know, this is sort of, we're trying to share how it is in so-called mania. Just by being manic, we're trying to share, it just gets shared, but in sort of a way that's not understandable. So this is sort of like, you know, people don't seem to understand, or I don't understand, like I don't understand anything, but the body can still seem to move by itself, and it could be moving in a creative field where the creative field is moving the body instead of the habitual field. So I don't know. Yeah, 427, Synchronicity, and other projects and ideas to ground and harvest and harness the energy of so-called mania, which creativity is part of what could help humanity's problems. And if we, with so-called bipolar, we have that in abundance sometimes, if we're able to find a way to ground that in daily life and bring it and share it in a way that's more understandable, we might be able to create a role where we spend more time sharing the creativity in a grounded way than explaining our symptoms and the fallout like we do right now. So there's a lot to that, a lot, but it's quite simple. And I think getting back to simplicity could help us, because we've tried with words for a long time. And I think humanity, there's just so many of us on the planet that it could literally be that there's so many words, but there's just so many brains that these words can't even come in to coalesce as an ego self to start moving the children in the same way, because we need to find a different movement, a different way of living. And it could be by first acknowledging that I don't know what anything means. And I think that's part of the Course in Miracles, is I don't know what these things mean. I don't know, like here's some things, start, you know, playing around with them and get back into our hands and like this, because if we don't, it's possible that one day we'll eventually be born like this, kind of like penguin, because we only are doing this. So the fingers will decide, oh, well, we only need a mitt in order to sit here and do this. Oh, actually, maybe like this, because some controllers have more like this, right? So I don't know. I really don't know. And that's part of what this is. Like, I freaking don't know. But I have a body that can move these things like this. And it's kind of like a child, you know? And like the children, some of the children they're doing these things where they're just going like, and we're like, we don't know what it means. But what they're trying to say is what we're trying to program them with is meaningless, or it's not the way. So by doing this, we might actually be able to tap into the intelligence of what they're doing that to us seems vastly unintelligent and meaningless, but we can go into it with them. And I think this might create a space in consciousness to help them too, because we're so much at them. And even with bipolar, like, we're in this creative space and then we start to fall out, and sometimes we get angry. And I read from Matt Kahn that these sometimes rude responses are a request for space, but generally sometimes we get hospitalized, which is a way to create space, but we're like being kind of probed and they're trying to help us get that sense of self back. So this movement too is to get rid of that sense of self and go into this meaningless movement of how, you know, the hands, the eyes, and the heart and the body, they can move in all sorts of ways, no matter what the mind is doing. But by actually paying attention, we might create something. And then we see what we can create with our hands, eyes, and heart together, moving in meaningless ways. So I don't know, let me know what you think.